We are there, the final episode, episode 30 of 90s Overlooked Underheard. This is Desalinity. I'm Darren. And today we'll be talking about two albums from 1998 and 1999 by US bands playing, on the surface at least, quite different flavours of indie rock. Let's go. So very briefly, before continuing, if you've stuck with this series, even if you've only watched one or two episodes in it, or if this is the first time you've watched it, thank you very much. This has been running since September last year. And as you can see from, my first video down there playing below, hopefully I've learned a little bit about shooting, pacing, editing, all that kind of stuff. This was my entry point into YouTube. So I very much appreciate all the encouragement, all the constructive criticism, and anything that you've offered me as viewers or subscribers. Thanks a lot. And so on to our first album today, which is White Trash Heroes by the Archers of Loaf, released on the 22nd of September, 1998. So if I'd have been making this video sometime last year, I would have been referring to White Trash Heroes as the band's final album. But of course, after a tentative live reunion in 2011, the band finally started writing and recording stuff much more recently. They released a single in 2020. And last year, towards the end of last year, they released an album called Reason in Decline. That's a full 24 years after the album that we're talking about today. So some brief band history. All the band are natives of Asheville from Western North Carolina, but they formed in Chapel Hill in about 1991. And they are Eric Bachman on guitar and vocals, Matt Gentling on bass, Eric Johnson on second guitar, and Mark Price on drums. So the debut single, Wrong, was tied in with a magazine release, shortly after which the band signed with Alias Records of Lexington, Kentucky, which was home to a couple of other bands in their early careers, like American Music Club or Yo La Tengo. So the Archers have at various points been kind of labelled as, indie rock, noise punk, lo-fi even. And I think their sound is, really rooted in a melodic take on punk rock, akin to a lot of the hardcore, post-hardcore bands of the late 80s and the early 90s. The clanging kind of noisy guitars, those abrasive kind of clashing sounds, I think that comes a lot from, some of the nascent kind of noise art rock bands like Sonic Youth. But the slightly more ramshackle rawness and the kind of the smart, the cynical, the slightly surreal lyrics do bring to mind a kind of a blue collar take on Pavement, if you like, Pavement, but less preppy. In fact, I think they sit in an almost comically perfect sweet spot between two other North Carolina, indie bands of this period, namely Superchunk and Polvo. Yeah, they have that scruffy pop punk clatter of Superchunk, but all the kind of the dissonant clanging riffs and the detuned sounds of, the much mathier Polvo. But either way, this sound of theirs evolved over the course of their 4 studio albums of the 90s period, through the debut Icky Metal and the follow-up VV, and becoming much more kind of nuanced and layered on all the nation's airports, and reaching its conclusion with this, their final album of that period. And this and the tours immediately before and after it are the things that really kind of broke them, really. They wanted to spend more time in the studio, pay more attention to the sound and the experimentation, introducing synths, keyboards, and that made it more difficult to play live. In fact, it wasn't that long after this album was released and completed that the band did split late in 1998. I also think the approach to recording this album is probably why I would consider it undervalued. It's less kind of immediate, more internalized, more reflective than their earlier albums, and I guess maybe that didn't play quite as well with the fans and critics at the time. So on with the album then, and some key tracks. Despite everything, I think the Archers of old are still right in there, in White Trash Heroes. The opener, Fashion Bleeds, blends this kind of martial drum shuffle with dual guitars, one fidgety, the other, crashing, framing this very typical Bachman lyric, calling out the facile trends and media inventions that he saw as throttling the life out of his and others' music. He sings, "You can hear the shouts from cars, cigars burn in trendy bars, flicking ashes on the heads of teenage kids with poorly tuned guitars." And similarly, the track One Slight Wrong Move, it sticks to that tried and tested Archers of Loaf recipe, albeit with some, extra studio magic sprinkled on it and an added talk box for a bit of extra fun. It's just that classic abrasive Archers noise pop, tinfoil feedback, tangled, detuned guitar lines catching fire, whilst on this occasion, a bunch of synths melt during the song's bridge. But there are calmer, more downbeat numbers where the band, unfurl, they kind of relax, stretch out a bit. Dead Red Eyes, which only kind of, I think, snaps into life halfway through with this typically seismic Matt Gentling kind of juddering bass line. And also in the slithery kind of tale of a con man's takedown of the unsuspecting protagonist in the song Slick Tricks, and Bright Lights, which surely must be some kind of reflection on the, the major label contractual shenanigans that were being rolled out to snag the, the unsuspecting indie bands of the day. Yeah, the track's perfect time, and I think After the Last Laugh combined the two sides of the Archers at this time perfectly, meshing the much more meticulous kind of studio construction approach that they were pursuing with what sounds like that more instinctive, road-tested, warped songwriting style that the band had. And they closed the album with the title track, White Trash Heroes, which I think possibly, points to the future that the Archers of Loaf would finally reconvene, to buff, to polish even further, over 20 years later. Yeah, it features these, very patiently building, arpeggiating synth patterns with these kind of sustained Robert Fripp kind of guitars, weaving this very mournful story of the hollowing out of the culture that Bachman saw happening around him. Yeah, he sings, "Dead ends lie along the neon sky, all speeding past, collide and crashing. I'm in paradise." Yeah, it's a great track to close the album with, and this is an album that I've always loved. I think sometimes when bands, push themselves to the brink, they can pull back a little, disappoint, leave something out. But this feels like the record that the Archers of Loaf, committed to making at the time, and I think they succeeded very, very well, even if it cost us the band its health. So then on to today's second album, and that is Emergency and I by the Dismemberment Plan, released on the 26th of October, 1999. So Dismemberment Plan, or a D-Plan as I refer to them from now on, just to kind of save me a few seconds every time I have to talk about the band. Before I do talk about the band, just a little note about this being the last 90s album on this list, and I think its significance in that context. So rewinding back to episode 1 again, I won't torture you with another clip of that. I was talking about the Sundays and their Reading, Writing and Arithmetic album on that video, and in particular about the role of the music press of that time in kind of breaking the band, introducing the album to listeners at the start of the 90s. And here's where I think we can compare and contrast with D-Plan at the tail end of the 90s. And despite being in a very different position to the Sundays, they'd been around for 5 or 6 years and they'd already released a couple of albums. I think this album is one of the earliest examples of, if I can coin a phrase, a Pitchfork record. Print media was being rapidly overtaken by online publications through the latter half of the 90s. And this album to me is the first example of a great record, I think, gaining significant traction with new listeners, the wider public, via the internet. And while I think Pitchfork had been responsible for pushing a few other indie bands earlier in the decade, Neutral Milk Hotel would be a good example, I think this was the first time that an album like this, which featured at number 1 in their end-of-year roundup for 1999, really got a significant push in that way. I think if you fast-forwarded a few years further on, like 2004, thereabouts, sites like Pitchfork, I'm not singling out Pitchfork, I'm just saying internet, music review sites in general, they were able to break bands. If you think of a band like the Arcade Fire, I think they became huge because of that, receptive audience that was now getting their music news, getting their music advice from the internet. Anyway, back from that little sidebar there, to D-Plan. Yeah, the band were Travis Morrison on guitar and vocals, Jason Cudell on second guitar, Eric Axelson on bass, and Joe Easley on drums. He'd replaced Steve Cummings, who stayed with the band only for their first album. Yeah, they were a DC area band springing from that, that same mid-90s post-hardcore scene that some other bands in this list have come from. And again, whether you like the label or not, I think many at the time would have dubbed the band as emo, certainly early on. But I think their influence was you could see that they were kind of fans of some of the more interesting, I think, of the post-hardcore, offshoots, if you like. You hear definite echoes of Shudder to Think in their music, Jawbox, Girls Against Boys maybe, but definitely Brainiac, alongside, of course, all the standard kind of influences, the scene mainstays like Fugazi. And I think by the time of this, Emergency and I, their third album, they were getting much, much bolder, and they were introducing elements of, hip-hop, R&B, even dance music in the kind of production and the way they were writing their songs. Yeah, very interesting use of synths and keyboards, programmed rhythms alongside, the live drums, bunched up against this, incredibly unpredictable kind of weird histrionic style that they'd grown. Yeah, I get a strong feel of the arc that bands like Talking Heads followed here, where they kind of took on, broad funk and R&B elements to supercharge that kind of new wave punk side of theirs. I hear a little of that in Dismemberment Plan. But I think along the instrumentation and just the sound of the band, you really have to take into account the voice and the lyrics of Travis Morrison. Yeah, double check back, and Travis is exactly the same age as me. So at the turn of millennium, around about the time this album was released, he would have been in his late 20s. And I think his lyrics really capture that kind of strange uncertainty and fear, that you kind of tend to run into at this time of your life. And particularly that point in history as well, the very late 90s. This isn't, by the way, just, my nostalgia kicking in here for that period of my life or his life. This is just an observation. Yeah, he marries very arresting imagery and surreal situations, but grounded in very real kind of surroundings of what a 20-something guy navigating, the cultural, the emotional landscape, of that period of time, that turn of the millennium world. And he does it all in this very clear, high, open voice. I've heard people liken it to Craig Wedren's. I hear a kind of a clearer, kind of folkier tone in Travis Morrison's voice. And I'm making the band sound like, very moody, introspective navel gazers here. Far from it. I did see them live on tour for the album following this one. That would be 2001's Change. And in a live setting, this music became, pure kind of partied up catharsis. Very funky, very kind of soul review feeling. Travis himself could bust out some pretty serious, kind of Prince moves, if you like, whilst he was rocking that nasty pink SG guitar that he was playing at the time. So yeah, I think they're an easy band to place, maybe in the scene that they came from, but they were very confoundingly, confusingly human and poppy, despite the manic kind of turns that some of their songs could take. Anyway, enough of the band. Let's get on to some key tracks. And A Life of Possibilities, the opening track, features this kind of growling, low-down synth playing off Travis's, sweet, high vocal with these neat little clip guitar figures dropping in and out. The ponderous kind of uncertain feel tickles along for almost 2/3 of the song's runtime until this huge descending chord sequence, flips the song back onto its feet and sets it on its way. It's D-Plan in a bottle. It's lovely stuff. Yeah, and what do you want me to say? Travis sings, "I lost my membership card to the human race, so don't forget the face." Yeah, this is the big anthemic pop moment on the album, I think, albeit, pitching these very jarring guitar stabs against this kind of very woozy, wallowing bass and drums. But then it resolves in this big emo chorus. It's very lopsided, very arresting entry point, to the song's payoff line. What do you want me to say? On Spider in the Snow, you get these tight little hemmed in kind of jazzy drums backing up a very kind of sawing kind of mellotron motif, whilst the bass walks up and down this little melody that Travis is about to pitch in with. Yeah, he sings, "The only thing worse than bad memories is no memories at all. From the age of 20 to 22, I had 5 friends, none of whose names I can recall." Yeah, this song is one of the emotional centers of the album for me. Travis is very deftly describing that unmoored feeling of being adrift, lost, reminiscing about life in the city and not really having a direction. And what a chorus too. That mellotron sound punches through and Travis's voice just lifts and soars. It's a wonderful, wonderful song and a real album highlight for me. Yeah, and then they swing back and forth with the moods over the next couple of tracks. The Jitters channels like that really dark, inward mood, very subdued feel, like some of, maybe Radiohead, some of their OK Computer tracks, the darker ones on that album. But then they follow the track then with I Love a Magician, which is this kind of spastic, caterwauling, all over the place song. Really channels that Brainiac vibe that I think the band were very into. The track You Are Invited is daringly minimal. It just rides a simple drum machine pattern for about half of its 5 minutes, just the drums and Travis's singing. But the track that really kills here is The City. It revisits the same subject matter as Spider in the Snow, but it's got this pushing, pulsing dance beat while keyboards kind of slide around and this guitar ringing out a simple one chord riff. And Travis just pulls every ounce of emotion out of the subject with his vocal. Yeah, he sings, "Sometimes I stand on the roof at night and watch as something seems to happen somewhere else." Yeah, this one effortlessly nails that nighttime kind of big city loneliness vibe, if you like. And Travis's vocal is absolutely spine-tingling on this one. Yeah, this is the one. This is your entry point into Dismemberment Plan if you're new to them. It's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, so the album Emergency Night, I think, is very much a snapshot of a band who found something really special and managed to squeeze some amazing things out of that for a short period. Their 2001 follow-up album, I think, Change It, is probably just as good. But yeah, this one is very distinctive, very evocative album that manages to marry some huge stylistic clashes with utter conviction. It's breezy, it's chaotic, it's stirring, and it's groovy in equal measures. Yeah, number 1 in 1999. Yeah, I think Pitchfork did get this one right. Anyway, yeah, that's it. It is accomplished. Thanks for sticking with me for this series again. This was my introduction to YouTube, so I've learned a lot along the way. Check the description below for the full list of all 50 albums, and that will help you get towards any videos in this series that you haven't already watched too. Don't forget as well, there is a Spotify playlist featuring a track from every album. And if you are wondering, I know some people out there maybe, yeah, I did have a bigger list to start with. I did narrow this one down to 50. And if you look down there, you should be seeing 30 of those records that I was considering as I whip through them down there now. I did agonize over some of these. I won't try and keep up with what's happening down there, but yeah, the Clean's Vehicle album, I've talked about that elsewhere. Yeah, Cop Shoot Cop, they had an amazing run of 2 or 3 albums in the 90s. Yeah, Consolidated, yeah, Oddly Prophetic, they could see what was coming clearly there. Idaho, yes, they're the one slowcore band I think that no one talks about enough. You'll see Libertine down there, which is my favorite Silkworm record. And also Jesus Lizard, their Shot album, their major label debut, I think is very unfairly treated. It's got some great songs on it. You'll also see the Van Pelt in there somewhere, I think. Yeah, they're getting back together. New stuff out imminently. And an album there at the end by Karate. Yeah, I know there are some big fans of the band out there. So that's it. I'm free to do whatever I like, free to do some other stuff. Please keep watching, watch this space. If you'd like to comment about anything in this video or that list of 30 albums at the end that didn't quite make it, yeah, please do so down below. Yeah, if you like this video, you know how to show your appreciation. You can like it, or why not subscribe, see what I'm doing sometime soon in the future. But whatever you do, most of all, thanks for watching. Hope to see you again soon. Bye for now.